So much for joining Stuff this morning.
Great to be here.
So you are filling in for leader Christopher Luxon, who came back with a positive COVID-19 test on Monday evening, I believe. How's he doing?
Look, he is sick, so he's doing what people are told to do when they have COVID, and he's resting up. So I'm sure he'll be back and fighting fit next week.
And how's it being the face of the party this week?
Oh, well, I'm glad that I've got the trust of my colleagues to do the job, and I will be very much looking forward to having Chris Luxon back in the big shoes next week.
So it's been a big week so far. The government has done its second quote reprioritisation, and essentially a few climate policies have hit the rubbish heap. There's been an increase in benefits, student allowance, NZ Super, along basically in line with inflation. In particular, I'm interested in the climate policies that the Prime Minister has gotten rid of. He said, well, basically, we're going to hit our climate goals, but these are just basically not very good value for money. How does that square with a party that's basically been saying, oh, we're keeping an eye on all the dollars and cents for the past year?
So why were they doing these projects in the first place? National has been consistently saying, with that revenue you get from the emissions trading scheme, which essentially puts a tax across the economy, you have to be really careful that you're getting value for every dollar. And we were really sceptical when the government's emission reduction plan came out that a lot of the stuff in there looked pretty wasteful and didn't meet the sniff test. We raised those concerns and we were told, no, this is all the right stuff to be doing. Well, it now turns out that's not the case at all. And really it just begs the question of how much more wasteful spending is happening both across that emissions plan but across the wider government as well.
So you're supportive of at least some of those measures that were taken the other day?
Yes, we think that dumping policies that are wasteful and aren't actually leading to efficient emission reduction makes sense. We suspect there are more of them in that plan, by the way. And we also think in a situation where the economy is so mismanaged that we've now got inflation running ahead of wages, that it's fair to inflation adjust super and other payments.
So the National Party is supportive of that?
Yes. You know, one of the things that we've really picked up in our communities is that superannuitants on fixed incomes are doing it very tough because they're so exposed to higher prices at the supermarket. Some, of course, are still renting, are really exposed to higher rents that are up $175 a week since Labor came into office. And so that little bit of an inflation adjustment is necessary. But I'd be clear, it's not making anyone rich. Actually, it's hard to applaud a Prime Minister for helping people to stand still. So,
stepping back a minute, obviously Chris Hipkins has now been in the job for, I think, a couple of months. He has very much repositioned the Labor Party, much more along the lines of a whole pile of things that the National Party was talking about last year. What do you make of that?
Well, I am concerned that what we're seeing is some window dressing, because actually this is the same Chris Hipkins who sat at the most senior levels of the cabinet table signing off on a policy agenda and a program of spending that has led us to where we are today. And now he's turning around and admitting that a lot of those policies were very wasteful and that they weren't delivering what New Zealanders want. So our view is actually don't make those stupid decisions in the first place. There's actually a lot more wasteful spending happening across government that you should be getting rid of, and you should be delivering income tax reduction. These are all arguments we've made for some time, and I think that the new Prime Minister has come to these arguments late. But the slightly tortured analogy I'd give you, Luke, is you can have a car that's got dents in it because the driver keeps on banging into things. You can take it to the panel beater, but actually if there's still a dangerous driver, you're still in trouble. And that's where this economy is right now. Yep, he's patching up some of the dents, but we need new direction for the economy as a whole.
Isn't part of the point though that he wasn't the boss before and he is now, and even though he was sitting in those meetings, he's now in charge and gets to shape the government's agenda to his will.
Yeah, and he's still got the same finance minister who was prepared to say that every dollar of his budget was essential spending. And we know that is not true, because we have had the last few days confirmation that many of those policies weren't going to reduce emissions in a large way, weren't delivering value. And National has consistently said there is wasteful spending going on across government. New Zealanders deserve to be keeping more of what they earn, and the government should be doing a lot more to take pressure off inflation and off interest rates.
So one of the big policies that National's had for a year or so now is indexation of income tax brackets. Is it? I mean, can New Zealanders expect more in the tax base from the National Party prior to the election?
Well, you've already seen us do more. So we have that base package at a minimum that we've said that we will do those specific inflation adjustments to brackets that Chris Luxon committed to last year. So for someone on a wage of $55,000 a year, that will deliver them $800 more a year. In addition, we've announced our Family Boost policy, which for families with children under 5, if they're in childcare, will deliver them up to $75 a week extra. So for a family with kids under 5 on an average household income, they could be up to $5,500 better off a year after tax under National.
And is there anything else that we should expect prior to the election?
Well, what I've always said is, when we get a look at the economic and fiscal conditions in the pre-election fiscal update, we will be judging to see whether we think more tax reduction can be afforded in future years. We'd like to reduce the tax New Zealanders pay further than the commitments that we've previously made, but we will only do that if it's fiscally and economically responsible to do so.
And one of the things that you mentioned before was the fact that obviously inflation's running ahead of wages. Tomorrow we're going to have a significant industrial dispute. There's going to be a strike of the teachers around the country. Obviously, of all of the workforces around, it's one of the most disruptive ones when they go out. Where's the National Party at on that? What's your position on the strike?
Well, look, we'd obviously much prefer there wasn't a strike happening. It's incredibly disruptive for parents, and I'm one of the lucky ones. My husband will be juggling the 4 kids at home, but for some families that means taking days off work where they won't be paid, trying to get grandma to cover the hours. It's stressful stuff, so we would have much preferred it if the negotiating parties had been able to reach a settlement. We're obviously not across the detail of what's happening in those negotiating rooms. That's necessarily confidential. So we've been hesitant to critique either side because we don't know what's going on in there. What our commitment to teachers is twofold. One of the driving goals of the next National Government will be to lift incomes for all, and that means real incomes. And teachers are absolutely part of that. If you ask New Zealanders where they'd like dollars spent in education, I think most people would say, well, let's make sure we're valuing teachers properly and putting money there. But the second thing we have to do for teachers is we do have to look at the support and conditions in which they are working. And we get feedback that not only do they face a lot more compliance and bureaucratic burden, they also often don't have access to the basic teaching resources, lesson plans and support that would make their jobs more straightforward.
What do you mean they don't have access to it?
Well, what you'll often hear a new teacher saying is that they spend their downtime coming up with lesson plans for the next term, for the new part of the curriculum, or designing how they're actually going to teach that unit of algebra or geometry. And our view is actually those should be resources that are readily available to every teacher, so they're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. So
pretty much the government should be finding the money for the teachers, is that what you're saying?
Well, as I say, Luke, I'm not privy to the details of the negotiation, and I think that what is fair will depend on what's been discussed and where things are. But in terms of a priority for education funding, paying our teachers well is important. The situation the government is in is that inflation has now been out of control for 21 months, completely out of the target, is running at the highest it has in 30 years, and that is making pay negotiations really, really difficult. Are you concerned about, the teachers at the moment, I understand the nurses are in negotiations, other workforces around the country. Are you concerned about the possibility of a wages and prices spiral? Well, certainly that is something that the Reserve Bank have hinted they have some concern about. And what we've said is pretty important, is that you've still got these significant worker shortages happening across sectors of the economy where we're lacking skilled workers, or you see in Queenstown even just basic shops are closed on the main street. There was a manufacturer the other day saying they've got 60 vacancies in their business. What that's doing is constraining productive growth. And what we want to see is productive growth, so that means having enough workers, having immigration settings that deliver that, and ensuring that what people are getting is real income growth, not just nominal growth that then gets eaten up by inflation in the next paycheck.
And for people at home, what do you mean by real income growth?
So real income growth is when, once you've adjusted for all of the inflation and price increases that have occurred in the economy, you're actually getting more pay. Real income growth happened under the last National government. People were getting ahead each pay cycle. What we've seen over the past 2.5 years is that while nominal wages have gone up, your paycheck might look bigger, it doesn't go as far because prices have increased so much across the economy. And so that's actually of no use, because in real terms you're going backwards.
Now, obviously, high inflation is a bit of a global phenomenon at the moment. To what degree is the government culpable for that?
There are global factors, inarguably, and there are also domestic factors that can't be avoided, such as weather events. However, there are certainly things that the government could be controlling. And I always note, it's interesting that US inflation has started to come back down before ours has, that the countries around the world that have the most severe rates of inflation are those that have been very exposed to the Russia-Ukraine energy situation. New Zealand's not in that boat. But when we look at what the government here hasn't done, well, as I say, it hasn't fixed those worker shortages which have exacerbated inflation here. The Reserve Bank has pointed that out in statement after statement after statement. It has continued to add new taxes and costs and regulations to productive businesses at a time where they've got just about no ability to absorb them, and they keep passing them on. You've seen that with rents. What they also haven't done is bring discipline to their own spending. Let's remember, Grant Robertson's budget last year had the biggest increase in spending we've ever seen in a New Zealand budget. The proportion of spending that this government is doing relative to the size of our economy is bigger than it has been in many, many years, and the tax take is up too. So our view has been actually a responsible government that was doing all it could to take pressure off inflation would have been much more disciplined about spending far in advance of the little backdowns this week.
So just to hew back to the start of the week and the various policy changes, obviously there's a poll that came out on Monday night. It showed both Labor and National down, but National Act not in a position to form government if those numbers were replicated on election night. What do you guys need to do to lift it up?
I think we need to talk to New Zealanders about our policy alternatives and our vision for the future of the country. When people hear our ideas for how we can turn things around, they like what we're saying. We haven't had much clear air over the past couple of months. Rightly, people have been focused on the Cyclone Gabrielle response, and the spotlight has been on a new Prime Minister. So our opportunity in the next 7 months until the election is to be very clear with New Zealanders. Here's what we're going to do to lift incomes. Here's what we're going to do to reduce the cost of living. Here's how we'll improve education standards, deliver better, more future-proofed infrastructure. Here's how we'll restore law and order. We've got great policies, great ideas, and we're very much looking forward to talking more about them.
Nicola Willis, huge year ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.